Security, throw this ape out. Now. Her words cracked through the boarding gate like glass shattering. Passengers froze mid-step, eyes snapping toward the uniformed attendant, pointing her finger like a loaded weapon. Beside her, a security officer shifted his weight, ready to enforce her order. At the center of it all stood him tall, composed, dark suit pressed sharp against the sterile blue glow of the terminal lights. One hand gripped his phone, the other resting steady at his side. His silence was louder than the insult. The crowd murmured. Some gasped. One teenager clutched her mother's sleeve. A businessman paused with his briefcase half raised, whispering, "Did she just say that out loud?" Cameras began to rise, small red recording lights piercing the charged air. He didn't flinch. He had heard variations of that sentence before on sidewalks, in lobbies, even in boardrooms, but never here. Not at Gate 14, where a first-class ticket had already been scanned green, and his seat 2 amperes waited untouched. The attendant's eyes narrowed, lips curling with a cruel smile. "This section isn't for people like you," she said louder, feeding the silence with venom. The officer's hand hovered near his radio, seconds away from turning prejudice into procedure. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to him." He stood as if anchored to the floor itself. The polished tiles reflected his frame, a man who dressed simply, without the armor of logos or luxury. Just a navy suit, clean white shirt, and the kind of calm that can't be faked. "Sir, step aside," the officer barked. Passengers shuffled nervously, sensing escalation. A young woman in line whispered, "But his ticket scanned. I saw it." Her words were almost swallowed by the tension, but not quite. The attendant snapped, louder, "Your boarding pass is fake. You're trespassing in first class." And with a swift, deliberate motion, she tore the paper in half. The sound, soft, cruel, final, hung heavier than thunder. The phone at his ear stayed in place. His expression never changed. Only his eyes, steady, unblinking, shifted toward her, then toward the officer, as if memorizing every detail for a ledger yet unseen. A voice inside him remembered other moments. 20 years earlier, a hotel lobby in Atlanta. He was younger, broke, dressed in worn slacks. A clerk had told him, "You don't look like someone who stays here." That night, he drafted his first business plan, and now here he was again. Different uniform, same tone. Passengers watched in disbelief. One man muttered, "This is wrong." Another raised his phone higher. The air in the terminal wasn't quiet anymore. It was humming, charged, a storm tightening around one calm figure. He lowered the phone just enough to speak into it. His voice was quiet, deliberate, but sharp as steel. "Activate protocol." The shredded boarding pass fluttered to the floor like ash. Passengers stared at the scraps, their silence carrying more weight than any announcement echoing through the terminal speakers. The attendant folded her arms, satisfied. "Problem solved," she said, her tone dripping with superiority. "Now take your bag and move." The officer stepped closer. His hand hovered over the strap of the sleek black carry-on, ready to claim it as evidence. "Sir, if you don't comply, we'll escort you out. You're disrupting boarding." But the man did not move. His voice remained calm, low, deliberate. "That ticket was valid. Run my name through your system." "To well do." The attendant scoffed, loud enough for the waiting passengers to hear. "We don't need to run anything. I know a scam when I see one." Her words weren't about policy, they were about control. A murmur spread through the crowd. A teenager whispered, "He scanned green. I saw it." A mother clutched her child's hand tighter. An older gentleman shook his head, muttering, "This is ugly. Real ugly." One man, mid-30s, tech startup hoodie, phone in hand, lifted his camera higher. The red record light blinked like a silent alarm. He whispered to the woman beside him, "They're going to regret this." The CEO's jaw tightened, but his posture never broke. This wasn't the first time. At 25, he had stood in a bank lobby, accused of forging his own signature. At 32, a hotel clerk had refused to hand him a room key without additional proof. Different uniforms, same pattern. The officer finally reached forward, gripping the carry-on handle. But before he could pull, the CEO spoke again, quiet, steady, every syllable sharpened. "Touch it, and you'll answer for more than lost luggage." The officer hesitated, not because he understood, but because of the weight in the man's tone. Something about it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise. The attendant rolled her eyes. "Are you threatening security now? That's enough." She turned toward the gate desk, grabbing the intercom phone. Her voice boomed across the terminal. "Manager to gate 14. Fraudulent passenger attempting entry. Possible criminal." Gasps rippled through the boarding line. The word criminal hung in the air like smoke. The CEO lowered his phone slightly, speaking into it without breaking eye contact. "Phase 2. Log her words." Passengers exchanged glances. Someone muttered, "Phase 2? Another raised their phone higher, capturing every angle. The atmosphere wasn't just tense anymore. It was shifting like a courtroom forming around them. And through it all, he stood silent, as if anchored to the floor itself, waiting for the storm he knew was already gathering. A tall figure strode toward gate 14, his badge swinging against a pressed navy blazer. The manager. His steps were brisk, his expression already hardened, as though the decision had been made before he even arrived. "What's the problem here?" he barked, scanning the scene. The attendant wasted no time. "He tried to sneak into first class with a fake ticket. I've already voided it." The manager's eyes fell on the man standing calm in the center. He didn't ask questions. He didn't check the system. He simply squared his shoulders and delivered the sentence like a verdict. "First class isn't for people like you." The words struck heavier than the torn boarding pass still scattered across the floor. Passengers gasped. One woman in line dropped her coffee. A man whispered, "Did he really just say that?" The CEO didn't flinch. His voice, measured and controlled, cut through the tension. "My ticket was scanned, verified. I belong in seat 2 amperes." But the manager shook his head, already turning to the officer. "Escort him out. We don't need imposters delaying this flight." The officer's hand landed firmer on the carry-on. The CEO's gaze locked on him, steady, unyielding. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "One you won't recover from. Hayden." The attendant smirked, arms crossed. "Oh, please. Save the drama. People like you pull stunts like this all the time. Play rich until someone calls your bluff." Her words sliced through the air, meant not just for him but for the audience gathering around. And the audience was growing. Phones raised higher, whispers louder, the gate transforming into a stage no airline commercial would ever want. Among the crowd, a young trainee flight attendant shifted nervously near the desk. She had seen his boarding pass scan green. She had watched the system flash, "First class, 2 amperes," before her senior tore it apart. Her lips trembled, but she stayed silent. Not yet. The manager stepped closer, lowering his voice but not his disdain. "Walk away now, or we'll have airport police handle you." The CEO's reply came smooth, precise, with no wasted breath. "Run my name." The manager scoffed. "We don't have time for games." Taitamo. But the man's silence after that wasn't submission, it was pressure. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply stood, eyes fixed forward, as if daring the system itself to expose the truth. Passengers murmured, unsettled. One teenager whispered into her phone's mic, "They're not even checking. They just assumed." Another man muttered, "This is going to go viral in seconds." The terminal air was no longer neutral. It was thick, electric, shifting against the staff's control. And at the center of it, he remained still, calm as a storm held in the palm of his hand. The manager's words still echoed, "First class isn't for people like you." The sentence didn't just sting, it lingered, heavy, sinking into the sterile white lights of Gate 14. All eyes turned to him. Some waited for outrage, others waited for collapse. But neither came. The man stood motionless, shoulders relaxed, phone still in his hand. His silence wasn't weakness, it was a shield. He let the moment breathe, let the tension stretch so tight that the sound of an espresso machine at a nearby kiosk felt deafening. The attendant mistook his calm for surrender. She leaned closer, smirk tugging her lips. "Nothing to say now? That's what I thought. You don't belong here, and deep down you know it." He didn't blink. He had heard versions of this line since he was 16, when a hotel clerk in Charlotte asked him to leave the lobby because guests only. He was in his Sunday best that day, but clothes had never been enough to silence prejudice, and they weren't enough now. The officer shifted uncomfortably, his hand still gripping the carry-on handle. "Sir, do yourself a favor. Walk away before this gets worse. Passengers stirred. A woman whispered, "Why isn't he fighting back?" A teenager answered, "Maybe he's scared." But an older man near the window shook his head. "No, that's not fear. That's control." 2. The manager crossed his arms, impatient. "This is wasting time. Security will be here any second, and when they arrive, you'll be removed permanently. No ticket, no refund." Still, the man said nothing. His stillness was louder than their insults, sharper than their threats. He let them talk, let them expose themselves. Every word was another rope tightening around their own authority. The attendant grew restless, mistaking silence for weakness again. You could have saved yourself the embarrassment. But instead, you wanted to play rich. Now everyone sees what you are. Her words bounced off him like pebbles against stone. He remained anchored, gaze steady, body calm. A young trainee nearby, the one who had seen the boarding pass scan green, bit her lip. She wanted to speak, but fear pinned her in place. Still, her eyes betrayed her guilt. And then, a voice from the crowd broke the hush. A passenger whispered, but loud enough for many to hear, "Why hasn't anyone actually checked his name?" The question hung there, dangerous, undeniable. Passengers exchanged looks. Murmurs grew louder. Phones angled closer. Through it all, he stood silent, waiting. Because sometimes the loudest answer is none at all. The silence cracked not from him, but from the crowd. A passenger in a gray hoodie raised his phone higher, the red recording light pulsing like a heartbeat. "This needs to be seen," he muttered, angling the camera toward the attendant, the manager, and the officer still gripping the carry-on bag. Another voice chimed in, a young woman in line, trembling but clear. "I watched his ticket scan green. He belongs here." Her words startled even herself, but once spoken, they couldn't be pulled back. The attendant whipped her head around, eyes sharp as glass. "Stay out of this. You don't know what you saw." But the crowd wasn't convinced. A teenager whispered into his mic for a live stream. "We're at gate 14. They just tore up a man's first-class ticket. This is insane." His chat exploded with comments, emojis, outrage, disbelief. The story was already leaving the terminal. The manager stepped forward, voice booming like authority could mask contempt. "Everyone calm down. This passenger is attempting fraud. We're following protocol." Yet the word fraud hung awkwardly in the air. Passengers exchanged looks. A woman with a stroller frowned. An older man shook his head. "Fraud? Without even checking?" he said aloud, his voice carrying across the gate. The CEO still hadn't moved. His phone rested steady in his hand, his body anchored like stone in a storm. But around him, the current was shifting. He didn't need to fight, others were beginning to see the cracks. The officer tugged the carry-on, as if to remind everyone of his role. "We've got procedures, he's non-compliant." "Why, non-compliant?" a passenger scoffed. "He hasn't said a word, you're the ones yelling." Phones tilted, capturing angles from left, right, above. The once routine boarding gate had become a stage. Every gesture, every insult, every pause was now evidence in a trial no one had planned, but everyone was witnessing. The trainee flight attendant's chest rose and fell rapidly. She knew the truth, but fear still pressed heavy. Her fingers hovered over the iPad system. She had the power to pull his name back up, to prove what she saw. But her senior's glare pinned her down. The attendant sneered, raising her chin. "He's wasting your time. He doesn't belong here, and soon security will handle it." But murmurs in the crowd only grew louder. The balance was shifting. And at the center, the man stayed silent. Because he understood something they didn't. When the world is watching, silence is not weakness. It's gravity. The manager's voice sliced through the murmurs. "Enough." He lifted the intercom handset, pressing the button hard enough for the click to echo. "Security command, this is gate 14. We have a fraudulent passenger attempting to board. Possible criminal activity. Send airport police immediately." The words rolled across the terminal speakers like a siren. Fraudulent, criminal, labels sharp enough to cut skin. Gasps rippled through the boarding line. A mother covered her daughter's ears. A businessman muttered, "He didn't even verify anything." A teenage boy shook his head at his live stream. "They're doubling down. This is bad." The attendant folded her arms, victorious. "There, now it's official." Her smile was thin, brittle, the kind of smile that hides fear behind authority. The officer tugged the carry-on harder. Hear that? Police are on the way. You can walk out quietly, or you can be dragged. Still, the man didn't move. His silence pressed heavier with each second. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't arguing. He was letting them write their own downfall in real time. The manager stepped closer. His tone sharpened into open disdain. You think a cheap suit and a printed pass get you into first class? This section is for real passengers, executives, board members, people who matter, not pretenders. The word hung in the air like poison. Pretender. From the crowd, a voice fired back. He scanned in. We all saw it. A woman near the window shouted, "Stop lying!" Phones caught everything, the sneer on the attendant's lips, the officer's grip on the bag, the manager's arrogance thick enough to choke the room. The trainee flight attendant shifted again, her hands trembling near the iPad. She whispered under her breath, "It was valid. I saw it." But fear kept her voice too low to carry. The manager turned back to the man, eyes cold. "When the police arrive, you'll be charged. That's the reality." The man finally lifted his gaze, unblinking, unshaken. His voice came soft, deliberate, like steel wrapped in velvet. "The reality is, you haven't even checked my name." The manager scoffed, but for the first time, his jaw tightened. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Doubt was spreading. The attendant hissed, "He's bluffing. They always bluff." But even as she spoke, the storm was no longer his to create. It was theirs. And every insult, every unchecked accusation, was the thunder building above their heads. Through it all, he stood anchored, calm, letting them bury themselves deeper. The officer's grip tightened, and with one sharp yank, the carry-on slipped from the man's side. The bag thudded against the floor as if stripped from him like contraband. Gasps shot through the gate. "Confiscated," the officer declared, kicking the bag a step behind him. "Until the police arrive." The attendant smirked wider. "Told you he was a fake. Real passengers don't come dressed like that, dragging toys in a designer bag." She towed the corner of the carry-on as if it were trash. The manager seized the moment, voice pitched to the crowd. "Everyone listen, this individual is attempting fraud against Horizon Airlines. He will not be boarding tonight or ever again." His words rang across the boarding area like a trial without a jury. A man near the window shouted, "That's not true." A woman snapped, "You never checked his ID." Phones rose higher, capturing every second. The story was no longer contained in Gate 14. It was already leaving the airport. The officer reached for his cuffs. Metal glinted under the harsh white lights. "Sir, hands out. You're being detained for non-compliance." The air snapped tight. A teenage girl gasped. A child whimpered. Even the attendant flinched, but she forced her smirk back into place. Finally, the man still didn't move. His hands stayed relaxed at his sides, his voice quiet but carrying across the gate like steel dragging over stone. "Touch me, and Horizon will pay more than you can afford." The officer froze, not because he believed him, but because of the weight in his tone. It wasn't panic, it wasn't fear, it was finality. The attendant leaned in, her voice dripping venom. "Empty threats. Men like you always fold when the cuffs come out." But behind her the crowd was no longer silent. A passenger shouted, "This is wrong." Another added, "He didn't raise his voice once. Why are you treating him like a criminal?" The manager snapped back, "Because he is one. Dressed down, carrying a fake pass, disturbing paying customers, that's a crime." He pointed at the scraps of the torn ticket still on the floor like evidence. Proof enough. The trainee flight attendant bit down on her lips so hard it almost drew blood. Her eyes flicked to the iPad, where she had seen the truth. Her silence was now complicity, and she knew it. The officer's cuffs still hovered in the air. The man's eyes never left them. His calm wasn't defiance, it was a mirror, reflecting their own actions back at them. And the crowd knew it. The officer's cuffs hovered inches from his wrists. The crowd held its breath, waiting for a clash of steel and skin. But instead of moving, the man lifted his phone higher, thumb brushing the screen with surgical calm. A single phrase left his lips, soft, deliberate, steady enough to cut through the noise. "Activate protocol." The words weren't loud, yet they carried like thunder. The officer paused mid-motion. The attendant frowned, confused. The manager scoffed. "What protocol? Bluffing doesn't save you." But on the other end of the call, a crisp voice answered instantly. "Confirmed. Protocol online. Logging begins now." The man's eyes never left the officer's. Document every word, every action, every insult. The assistant's voice flowed like steel wire through the phone, already time-stamped. Internal compliance is watching. The manager barked a laugh, brittle. Internal compliance? Do you think you scare me with corporate buzzwords? You're a nobody in a cheap suit. Security, finish this. But the officer hesitated. Something about the man's calm, the certainty in his tone, felt wrong, like a chess game in which the checkmate had already been played. Passengers leaned closer, their whispers a tide. He's calling someone. Who's on the other end? He sounds official. The attendant sneered, trying to claw back control. This is pathetic. Pretending you have connections? You'll be in handcuffs before that call even matters. The man turned his head slowly toward her, gaze sharp enough to slice. His voice lowered but grew heavier. You just ordered security to throw out a shareholder. Every second of it is being logged. Dabdru. The crowd erupted. Gasps, murmurs, phones tilted higher. A woman whispered, "Shareholder?" A man added, "Wait, what did he just say?" The manager slammed his palm against the gate desk. "Lies. He's nobody. Do not listen." His voice cracked louder than he intended, desperation leaking into command. Meanwhile, the assistant's voice returned steady in the man's ear. Cross-referencing employee IDs. Confirmed. Attendant and manager names logged. Bias language flagged. Escalation team notified. Help. The man gave a single nod, eyes still locked on the trembling officer. Keep it running. The cuffs lowered. Not because of mercy, but because the weight in the air had shifted. The officer wasn't sure whose orders held power anymore. And the passengers knew it. Their murmurs grew into a chorus, the storm no longer contained by uniforms or lies. At Gate 14, silence had been his weapon. Now, his words were the strike. The gate was no longer just a checkpoint. It was a courtroom. Every phone a witness, every whisper a verdict waiting to fall. The man finally lowered his phone, sliding it into his pocket with the same composure as a judge putting away a gavel. He took one step forward. The officer instinctively stepped back. The crowd leaned in. "You've spent the last 10 minutes calling me a fraud," he began, voice even measured. "You tore my boarding pass. You seized my property. You threatened cuffs. And you did it all without checking one simple fact." The attendant rolled her eyes, trying to keep control. "Oh, please, save the speech." He didn't stop. His gaze cut straight through her. "The fact that seat 2 Amperes was assigned to me, that this airline does not just know my name, it carries my signature." A ripple ran through the passengers. Phones lifted higher. Someone whispered, "Wait, what did he just say?" The manager barked out a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Signature? You think you can bluff your way through this?" The man's next words detonated like a controlled charge. "I am not your passenger. I am your owner." The terminal gasped in unison. The attendant's smirk collapsed. The officer froze mid-breath. The crowd erupted into shocked whispers. "Owner? Did he say owner? Oh my God!" He stepped closer, eyes fixed on the manager who suddenly seemed 2 sizes smaller. "You just tried to throw out the man who funds your paycheck. The man who built this route. The man whose name sits on the charter license hanging in your corporate office." The manager stammered, his face draining of color. That's impossible." From the back, a passenger shouted, "Check the stock filings, he's telling the truth." Another murmured, "I've seen his face in Forbes." The attendant's arms dropped to her sides. Her voice came out thin. You're lying. This is some stunt." But her words carried no weight now. Not against the tidal wave of recognition sweeping the gate. Phones were already buzzing with search results. Images, articles, headlines. His face on magazine covers, investor reports, conference stages. The same face standing silent at Gate 14. The man's voice stayed calm, unwavering. "You didn't just disrespect a customer. You disrespected the CEO and majority shareholder of this airline, and every second of it has been recorded." 2. The crowd roared not in cheers, but in outrage. Vindication, disbelief turned into proof. Passengers clapped, shouted, held their phones higher. The storm had shifted, and every eye was now on the staff, their power stripped bare in the light of truth. At Gate 14, silence had been his weapon. Now revelation was his blade. The words landed like a verdict. "I am your owner." Silence ripped through Gate 14. the kind that swallows sound whole before spitting it back louder. Then the chaos began. The attendant's face drained of color, her smirk, her venom gone. She stumbled a step back, eyes darting to the manager like a child looking for cover. He's not serious, right? Tell me he's not. The manager's jaw opened, but no words came. Sweat beaded along his hairline. His confident posture collapsed, replaced with the jitter of a man realizing the ground beneath him was gone. The officer looked down at the carry-on he had confiscated, as though it had suddenly turned radioactive. His hands hovered above it, unsure whether to drop it, return it, or pretend it had never touched his boots. And the crowd, the crowd was alive now. Phones raised high, flashes of recognition spreading as headlines appeared on screens. Forbes cover, Bloomberg keynote, Airline industry summit, his name and face stitched across the internet. Undeniable proof of the truth standing before them. Gasps turned into shouts. He's real. I knew it. Check your stock app, his name is there. The murmurs rolled into applause, passengers clapping not just for him, but against them, the staff who had misjudged, humiliated, and crossed the line. One woman near the front shouted, "You tore your CEO's ticket, on camera!" Another man laughed in disbelief. "This video's going to bury them." The trainee flight attendant, silent until now, finally stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "I saw it. His ticket was valid. It was in the system." They ignored it. Her words cracked the last defense the staff had left. The attendant spun on her. "Shut up." But the passengers shouted her down. "Let her speak! She's telling the truth!" Phones panned to capture every angle. The manager's pale face, the attendant's crumbling fad, the officer's hesitation, the crowd swelling into a chorus of outrage. The man stood still at the center, not raising his voice, not basking in the attention. He didn't need to. The storm had turned, and its weight was crushing everyone who had doubted him. The manager whispered, almost to himself, This can't be happening." But his words were drowned by the sound of 100 recording devices capturing his unraveling in real time. Applause swelled again, not polite but thunderous justice echoing off the sterile white walls of the terminal. And in that roar, the staff who had once controlled the scene now stood exposed, stripped of power, their authority shredded like the boarding pass they had torn minutes earlier. At Gate 14, humiliation had flipped its script, and the cameras weren't looking away. The clapping died down into a tense hush, every eye fixed on him. He slid his phone back into his palm, pressed one button, and lifted it to his ear. His tone was calm, surgical. "Log this incident under executive authority," he said. "Effective, immediately terminate the gate manager, the lead attendant, and the responding officer. Freeze their credentials." On the other end, the assistant's voice came clear, unwavering. "Confirmed. Processing now." A beat later, it happened. The manager's badge, clipped proudly to his blazer, blinked red. He tapped it against the desk. Desperate. Nothing. Access denied. The attendant's ID followed, its screen flashing invalid. She jabbed it again and again against the reader, panic rising. "It's not working. Why isn't it working?" The officer's radio crackled once, then fell silent. The airport system had cut him out completely. His cuff key beeped and locked in place, disabled by the same network he thought he controlled. His hands trembled around cold steel that no longer obeyed him. Gasps rippled through the passengers. Some laughed in disbelief. A man shouted, "He just shut them down." Another added, "On the spot. That's real power." The manager staggered, his voice cracking. You can't do this. I have rights." The man's gaze didn't waver. "So did I. And you trampled them. In my house." The attendant's voice broke into shrill panic. "Please, this is a mistake. I didn't know who you were." Finally, his eyes turned to her, calm but cutting. "And that's the point. Respect should not depend on recognition. You failed at both." The trainee flight attendant stood frozen, her own badge still green, untouched. Relief washed over her face, but also fear. Fear of what truth costs, and awe at what justice looks like. The crowd erupted again, applause rolling like thunder, phones capturing the staff's downfall in real time. Some passengers cheered, others simply stared, stunned, watching authority collapse in front of them. The manager slumped against the counter, pale, eyes wide. The attendant covered her face with trembling hands. The officer backed away from the carry-on, as though touching it again would burn him, and at the center, the man remained steady, untouched by their chaos. One phone call had dismantled their power. No shouting, no struggle, just consequence. At Gate 14, justice wasn't loud. It was absolute. The boarding area was silent now. No insults, no orders, no smirks. Just the hollow sound of 3 fallen employees breathing shallow, stripped of their authority in the very place they thought untouchable. The man bent down, lifted his carry-on with calm precision, and straightened his suit. The officer didn't try to stop him. The attendant didn't dare speak. The manager couldn't lift his eyes. He turned slowly, facing the crowd. Dozens of phones glowed back at him, recording, streaming, immortalizing the moment. Applause broke out again, not frantic, but steady, respectful, like a courtroom standing for a verdict. His voice cut through the hush, quiet, steady, yet carrying the weight of the whole terminal. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I didn't push, because power doesn't need noise. Remember that. The words sank deep, hitting harder than any shout could. A man whispered, "That's a line for history." Another passenger muttered, "Mic drop." The trainee flight attendant stood straighter, her eyes shining not just with relief, but with conviction. She had witnessed the cost of silence and the power of truth. The man turned back toward the gate desk. With one motion, he picked up the shredded remnants of his boarding pass from the floor, slid them into his pocket, and handed the officer his phone. "Send this to legal. The record is complete." The officer nodded, trembling, not out of fear for him, but fear of the system that had just revealed itself through him. Then, without ceremony, the boarding gate lit green. The scanner recognized him not as a pretender, not as a passenger, but as authority woven into the airline's very core. The door unlocked with a soft chime. He walked forward. Each step was unhurried, anchored, deliberate. As he crossed the threshold, the applause swelled behind him. Passengers rose to their feet, clapping, recording, whispering lines that would echo online within minutes. The attendant sobbed quietly. The manager collapsed into a chair. The officer lowered his head. And he disappeared into the jet bridge, leaving only his words behind, sharp as steel, final as law. "I am not the clip you recorded, I am the result of it." The door shut. The flight continued. But Gate 14 would never forget.